This conference will now be recorded.
Call the zoning board meeting of August 16th, 2022 to order. And we will start with case 22-09, the waterside what's it called? Water slide, I know, I kept it.
Right there, there's a mic there. Well, you know,
It gets recorded by the computer, yeah.
so you can, might not have to.
Hello.
Before you start, we only have 3 of our 4-member board. So you need a full unanimous yes vote from the people that are present in order for it to pass. Where if the 4th person was here, there could be 1 dissenter and it would still pass.
Okay,
So you have the option to carry your case to next month if you want, or go forward with it tonight. Either, it's up to you.
we'll go, and if I need to come back, then with a full board, is that an option?
So not really, you'd have to appeal it.
Yeah, denial is fine. Get all 3 yeses. Right, like you said.
3
Yes
yeses,
votes.
yeah.
So you have the option since one person.
Good evening.
So just you have
This
read
is-
your application into the record,
Yes,
and then we'll go from there. Awesome.
thank you.
Thank you.
And I first can say that at my age, this is my first rodeo. My name is William McLean. I own and reside at Waterside Condos at Winnisquam. I'm the president, so I am the lucky one to be speaking for the other 3 owners. We have a very small association with just the 4 units. Our storage, just a little history, is just a crawl space. It's the old 1989 crawl space, which is hardly even able to be crawled underneath to get storage. We at our summer meeting, annual meeting this summer, we brought up the discussion of storage. We discussed having possibility of using and speaking on 4 buildings, but we didn't want to make it look like a mushroom field. So that's why we decided on 2 10 by 20, and each unit will have a petition. The contractor is going to put a petition, so everybody ends up with a 10 by 10 storage unit, and with their own doors and lockable. Just a little on the storage, I have searched quite a bit to find one that we would be able to pretty much match the buildings we have. The vinyl siding and the multi-brown shingled roof. I was able to find the gentleman down in Epping, and that's who we have generally started working with. And I think you have a spec sheet from him for that sake. We measured out, we set up our plan, we looked at it, we thought it was feasible for our safety and also our security, because we are between, at this point now, 2 commercial businesses, actually 3 if you put all together. On the west side of us on our property is the Lobster Connection, and on the right side, the new one Craig put up is the ice cream stand, and then the Winnisquam Deli. Of course, during the summer, it's quite busy. We do have a stockade fence that goes all the way down through, and then our boundary line is actually a little bit behind that because we didn't put it right on the line when it was built. When it was built, I'm not sure. I've only been a resident for 1.5 years. Let's see, what else? So when we looked at it, I suggested to the other owners to have a 10-foot, not a 10-foot, a 4-foot from the fence so that we can maintain the fence, and we'd also be able to maintain the storage sheds for any repair or any snow removal that we need to get from the roof. And that's the plot that you see that I suggested. We made the application, came out, was examined, and we're told that we'd had to have a variance for what is the code at 10 feet. So at that point, I think I'll cease and stop right now and take anything that you want. I understand I have to discuss my variance that we're looking for, even though I've already covered some of it, but I'll wait until you want me to do something.
Yeah, if you, it's a pain, I totally understand, but if you could just read the application into the record.
You want me to start from?
Right, yeah, the five, number one, the
Oh, the
granting of
section one.
variance, yep.
Okay. The variance was stated as Article 7, Appendix C, in which the two 10 by 20 sheds are constructed 4 feet from the setback, which is, I measured from the stockade fence, not the actual posting. Granting the variance contrary to the public interest will not be contrary. Construction will still be within the boundaries of our property. Within the extra 6 feet fencing surrounding the property to buffer us from the neighboring businesses. Fences, like I said, 6 foot. The building walls themselves will be 6'9", and so really the businesses will only see the roof line. So actually, that result gives us more privacy. Because as it is now, I come out and go down my chairlift, I've got everybody watching what's going on in our backyard. So, number 3, 2, granting the variance would not be contrary to public interest. I already read that. Oh, the number 2, the setback would be 4 feet, not the required 10 foot. That's the variance we're asking for. Granting a variance would do substantial justice because the 2 sheds would be more appropriately located on the lot, more aesthetically appealing to the highly visible of the area. Variance were granted, the values of the surrounding properties would not diminish because they will not be any infringement on their properties, will not distract their views. The placement would allow owners for view of the parking lot, for security and for safety. That's the only place we do, the parking lot, of course, is behind where our entrances are. And we have many people come in and use our parking lot for the businesses. I've had people park in front of our our entrance. We can't get out. So without that visual ability, it would be difficult to know what's actually going around in the neighborhood. That would be another reason for that.
There are some pictures too.
Yeah, I think we got those.
But a stakeout of what it would look like with the 2 buildings. Discussion with that, I can help you. Number 5, unnecessary hardships. Owning the special condition of property that distinguish it from the other property of the area. Denial of the variance would result in unnecessary hardship because no fair and substantial relationship exists between the general public purpose of the ordinance. The storage sheds would allow personal property. Yeah, out of view. I'm sorry, I can't even read my own writing. Out of view and securely storage. The property is located between 2 commercial properties. At this point in time, any of our lawn, rakes, shovels are leaning up against the post. It takes away from anybody seeing it. The only place you can, in the very front, I didn't show in any pictures or anything, we have bushes that kind of hide the property from the public coming down that access road and Laconia Road, and helps kind of buffer it for us. The entrance, and then at that point is where they would see. So they would have a difficult time seeing the storages, even with the adjusted to the 4 feet. Number 2, the use is a reasonable one because the construction is placed to match the condo units as possible. And I already mentioned that of how we're going to construct it so that it would match. It would not be a barn coming off a farmyard. I'm not discriminating anybody's farmyard, but I mean, we're trying to make it dress up the same way. My pictures are black and white because my print is black and white. Explain if the criteria or subparagraph are not established or an unnecessary hardship would be deemed to exist if and only if owning a special condition of the property to distinguish it from other properties in the area. The property cannot be reasonably used in restriction to conformance with the ordinance. And the variance is therefore necessary. The ordinance of a setback of 10 feet would obstruct the use of the property section involved. We don't have much land as far as grass or anything in the front of our building. If I have to come out 10 from the fence and then 10 for the shed, that takes up 20 feet, which only leaves about 10 feet of lawn. Keeping two things in mind, the end of the parking lot towards the shed proposal is where our snow removal is. It would also also allow us to have snow removal left and right of the sidewalk that we have. We have the one sidewalk and then it splits, as you can see pictures, to the condos themselves. Yes, that's what I wrote.
Awesome.
Any questions? I don't know. Anything you didn't?
Just because just for clarification, so your 4-foot setback is actually to the fence,
To the
not
fence.
necessarily to your property line.
That my property line is actually behind the fence, because when the fence was put up, you gotta have you don't want to be on it and make a mistake.
Do you know how far off the property line it
I
actually?
don't.
No.
I don't. I'm gonna say 2 feet. I don't know. I wasn't there when it was built, but I see on Craig's property, there is some posts, concrete inserted posts on the back side of the fence, on both sides, the east and the west, because there was a chain link fence on the ice cream truck area when we all used, when we walked by it, when Craig proposed where he wanted. That was the ice cream truck.
Okay, so you actually you need less of a variance than what you're asking for, right? Am I wording that right?
Right, so he.
Is-
Correct, and it's two,
Where it's at, right?
so for,
Covers the.
Four
bases.
covers it.
from the fence.
I went from the fence because of not knowing, and I didn't want to get into numbers that weren't correct. I figured if I took it on the basis of the fence, that's what we could be talking about. But I understand what you're saying, but not knowing it, I wouldn't want to
Totally
You don't want to put it in.
play that
You can
game.
only be more.
Right, you'd be more conforming, yeah. That's a better way of putting it.
Thank you for the help.
Any questions so far? I should probably read this on the record before I
Yeah, you
forget
go
underneath
ahead.
there. I'm just gonna read this letter from an abutter before I have it buried in the paperwork. To the Tilton Zoning Board of Adjustment, I'm the owner of the abutting properties of 1011 Laconia Road, and I own 1015 Laconia Road, as well as 1007 Laconia Road. There are 4 condos on the property in question. All of the owners of that property have been wonderful neighbors. Our hope is that the board will allow the variance of 4 feet where 10 is required. The 2 10-by-20 sheds they're looking to build are reasonable. The storage area on that property is very tight. Respectfully, Craig Wiseman, President of Sailview Incorporated. On that, is there any other public comment in this case?
I'm seeing in picture 1, a house right there.
That's on that side, that is the west side.
Yep.
Lobster Connection is in the front of it, and
Okay,
that's Craig's rental.
okay.
He has 2 units, a downstairs unit and an upstairs unit.
And Craig was the one who just
Wrote that letter.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right.
And that's our stockade fence. I think you might see in one of the pictures.
Yeah, I see him.
Is the storage shed going to be higher than the fence or?
The roof line will be. It's not as much as the rental across the way, but it will be because of the fence is a 6-foot stockade fence and the building set on blocks. It's not permanent, set on blocks will for levelness. And then the walls are 6'9", so the
Okay.
lower is the one chosen is, I think, the carriage, which has a softer pitch than the big pitch. So it'll stick up less. I think it might go up 3 feet above it, I guess.
Thank you.
Any particular reason you didn't just do one building? Is it just to,
Because it's 4
For-
condos.
well, right, well, one,
Oh.
like,
We
longer
don't,
building, that sort of thing.
we really wouldn't have, what, I mean, one
Yeah, like
building
it's-
of 4 sections?
Sure, and impose only on
And,
one lot line.
If you look on here, going up to the actual beginning in the porches of the 2 condos, there isn't 40 feet there.
Not big enough.
Yeah, I've seen.
More of a setback if it was larger anyway.
The way it
Might
was
need two, like a front.
explained to
Because
it.
the Ordinance is.
Needs a
is
bigger.
a Big setback.
Right.
Right at it.
Right at it.
Time, but it worked. Again, I want to stress that we don't have the storage in the crawl space area. There's another owner that is also retired, not as old as I am, but he is retired. The other younger couple, they don't usually use it, but they would like the outside also because of their lawn care. And it's just, I don't know if you've ever been, a habit of a crawl space. It's just not, we just wouldn't have any. And too many things are outside. And we just want to keep the yard appearance wise okay for the people coming through and everything else. We do have 3 parking. Everybody has 3 parking spaces in the parking lot. And I want to go back to the security and the safety issue as far as if you bring those sheds out another 6 feet on both sides, you will not see basically the cars where they're parked. You'll see the center of the parking lot, but you won't be able to see if there's anything going on with the cars. That's the biggest issue as far as why we, along with that, but that's why we only want to come out the 4 feet to accommodate the 10, and we still have a good path of about 20 feet, even with the walkway, to be looking at generally most of the parking area.
This is what the shed looks
We've had problems with
Yeah.
people breaking into cars in years past. It hasn't happened since I've been there. One of the pictures shows what I'm speaking of.
Yeah, that,
I think it's picture number. No, it's not number 1.
That.
talking
Right. Now,
about
picture
looking
number
back.
2. Picture number 2 is the right-hand building,
Right.
which is mine. I have the downstairs, of course, you see the entry. The entry would still be able to look out past. And that's the stakes where we put for 4 feet. Be able to look out in the parking lot. I'm upstairs, and I'm the only permanent resident. That's our full-time home. And my deck does go a little bit further to the left, so I have an absolute full view of the parking area. And so forth. And like I said, it also accommodates us for snow removal because all the snow come from the road all the way in through all the parking
Back
lot
down.
is,
Hmm.
whatever parking lot is, I don't know. So that's substantial snow that we have to plow onto the grass.
Question? No?
No?
Ready to close it and discuss?
Yep.
Anything else you want to add?
Anything else I have to add?
Swearing in.
If you wanted to look at any of the specifics, towards the end is the shed master,
Oh, yeah, I saw that.
his building. I don't know if you ever heard of Shed Master, but he did some of the sheds that are up in Franklin School District. The design that I have on that is a sample of what would be put in place here. It's a little bit bigger, and we would have 2 double doors one for each one, and then the windows for cosmetics plus for air. And we'd also put a ridge vent on the top because it is the hotter areas because the sun does come all day long if you have sun. But that would be the basic design, and we didn't want it to overbear the condos as they are, and we didn't want to overtake the full property, and that's why we're asking the variance.
Thank you.
Thank you.
No public comment. We already did that. We read that one in. All right, we'll close public comment and discuss. Kind of right smack dab in the middle of the lawns, meeting. Setbacks.
It makes a lot of fine. It's further somewhere and not like there. I mean, he might only be looking for.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You guys want to go through?
yeah.
Granting the variance would not be contrary to the public interest. Usually this one's kind of there's no public impact on this and the abutters are on board with it. There's already a physical barrier on both sides.
I agree.
Yep.
The variance were granted, the spirits of the ordinance would be observed. Falls into the same thing there for me. Granting the variance to do substantial justice. Again, I don't see any injustice to the public by putting 2 sheds on a residential property surrounded by commercial properties. The variance are granted, the values of surrounding properties would not be diminished. No evidence to prove that it would be diminished the value. Unnecessary hardship owing to a special condition of the property that distinguishes it from other properties in the area. Denial of variance would result in unnecessary hardship because no fair and substantial relationship exists between the general public purpose of the ordinance provision and the specific application of that provision to the property. Yeah, I mean, we're talking about sheds in basically a commercial district, residential property mixed into it. Again, there's already a physical barrier in between them. And the proposed use is a reasonable one. I think it meets both.
Yep.
If we literally enforced it, they'd have to put 2 sheds right smack dab in the middle of there.
Right. Rob, a good point, being able to see the parking lot. I can understand the concern.
Yeah, being able to look out the window and,
Be able to see what's going on without having to go outside.
sure, yeah. In a busy area.
Really?
Yeah.
I would want to.
Any motions?
I make a motion to approve ZB 22-09 as currently stated in the application.
I second the motion.
Made and seconded. Those in, any discussion?
No.
No discussion. Those in favor of approving zoning board case 22-09, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And ayes have it.
Good to
Thank you
go.
for coming in.
Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
All right, and case 22-10.
Good night. You too, thanks.
Yes, I know. We're already in there. Chris, if you want to put this up.
Front one too, for this.
Yeah. Have it on my website.
All right. All right, thanks for having us again. You guys want to kind of a quick recap before we go into the whole narrative, or it's kind of a summary of why we're here?
Sure.
So,
And
for
you don't have to
everybody
do the whole, like, the
Yeah,
whole
we
last
can,
time
yeah,
one.
we already,
Okay.
yeah, we don't need that.
So we'll get into that. So we're here tonight to ask for a variance for the parking count at the preserve. So according to your regulations, you look at a hotel with a restaurant and support spaces as all individual entities. So the hotel would require 1 parking space for a guest room, the restaurant as well, a parking space for per the chair count, the spa and the event barn. So because of that, there's going to be an overabundance of parking. And in looking at this as a resort, which is kind of an all-inclusive resort, is those who would be coming to stay at the resort would also be using the restaurant, using the bar, and the other amenities. So the parking count ends up double dipping, where we would end up with additional parking that we don't need for the project. So we're here to ask you for variance to reduce the amount of parking for the project. We do have the land that's required, say if we did need to have the full amount of parking. It's not that we can't accommodate that. We don't see the need for it, and we see that there is not a need, and we would rather preserve the forests and the waterfront rather than building parking lots that aren't going to be utilized. So, and I can kind of go back to the parking count summary. So I did a summary of, how did we get to the parking count that we would like to use. Let me see if I can get this. So we went through the building, and part of this was we needed to do a summary of the occupants of the building for fire code and other permitting reasons. But we went through each space within the building. First off is the inn, is how many guest rooms do we have, and then the parking count that's required. So say the actual guest rooms themselves, we show a total of 131 parking spaces, and that's per your regulations, so the full amount of parking. We then move down throughout the other functions of the building. So the first function is the spa. We looked at how many employees and how many patrons, gives us a total of 20. And then we calculate that 70% of those actually going to the spa would be from the inn itself. So that leaves us, there would be 7 additional parking spaces that would be unneeded. And that we kind of go throughout the facility. So say the bar, we would need 67 parking spaces, seeing that 70% of that would be people who are actually at the resort itself, staying at the resort and going to the bar for dinner or for lunch. So that would be, we've taken that reduction. So we're still accommodating 30% non-guest visitors in the parking counts. So that if there are people coming either to visit other guests there or just people coming for dinner. But if the inn is operating at 100% capacity, the restaurants are going to be full of the inn patrons. So there's just not room for those people to go and use those spaces because they're supporting the inn itself. So really all of these spaces go back to the guest rooms is what's driving the parking count, not the restaurants and all the other extra spaces, because those are there to serve the guest rooms. So same as the restaurant, we have the total count. We've then reduced that number, accommodated 30% of outside guests plus the full amount of guests in the building staying at that facility. And that kind of runs throughout the whole building. And we total up at, if I can scroll down, 295 parking spaces. Sorry, it's pretty small still, for the resort. So that's, in addition to those initial exact amount, the initial 131 spaces that would be needed for the inn itself, we end up with 295 parking spaces. So that accommodates all of the other uses on the property. Say if we were going to build the parking as it's written in the zoning laws, there would be another roughly 265 parking spaces that would be needed to accommodate the restaurant being completely full without any of the inn's patrons frequenting the restaurant and the bar itself, which was a scenario that we don't see ever happening, nor do we want it to happen. This is a resort that's there to, and say the bar is there to accommodate the inn guests, not to be a secondary business. It's also all in one building. So I can kind of run through the plan where it's not that we're building separate structures on the property. All of the functions take place in this main building, which also, I'm sorry, this is pretty touchy. So so here we have the main building of the inn, which is the building we were talking about last time we were here. That kind of white piece that surrounds the bowl. Can move down to the plan.
Question.
Yep.
In the proposed inn, you're talking about a restaurant, obviously, and, rooms. And then did you mention like a banquet or something like that? Like, are you going to host essentially weddings there?
Yes.
Right. So if the guests come for the wedding but don't stay at the inn, so you're going to have an overflow there, but your inn is booked. So on a busy summer day, your inn's going to be booked.
Mhm.
It's going to be great. And then you're going to have the issue with the banquet hosting a wedding, them maybe staying elsewhere because they couldn't get room.
Yep.
So how do you account for the additional meeting part?
We have, so 130 parking spaces would be for the inn, and out of the 295, the rest of those would be able to accommodate anybody else coming to the facility.
Right, because you're saying potentially a 30% reduction from max.
And
but
that
you're
would be,
maxed.
yeah, max, but that's all of the function areas. So that's the bar, the restaurant, and the
Spa,
function
and the
hall,
spa.
and the spa. So you've got to think that you're going to have 131 people staying there, plus you're going to have this event going on, and then nobody else is going to be using the restaurant or the bar, or it's all outside people using the restaurant and the bar. So that's where we end up with an extra 160 extra spaces, which would accommodate 300 people in the function hall. So there's additional parking available for that function. Also, if we are having a function, we don't want another 100 people coming in cars. They would be staying somewhere else. There would be a bus that would be bringing people to this facility and leaving. So we're not looking to host,
That is
an
truly
additional.
the plan that you would bus them in.
Yeah, and with any of these parking spaces, I mean, one thing we look at is this is going to limit the amount of people that can actually be at the resort. We only have 295 cars. That's 290, or say 600 people can be there, 2 people per car. That's as much. Anything more than that, we would need to bus anyways, if there would be a function. So this plan here shows if we were going to build the roughly 550 parking spaces, what it would look like in addition to the parking spaces that we've accommodated currently, which would be, we have the space. It's not an issue with the impervious surface area. It works in the calculations. So and I can, oh yeah, you can see it up there. So
So the dog leg, that's the parking, including all of the zoning or the ordinance required spaces. That's just what we're looking at there.
yeah, so those white boxes, let me scroll up to,
I think that dog leg one would be the additional,
That's the extra, like if.
that the extra
265
265 they
yeah.
need.
so we would add another parking area here. We would double the size of this, and then we would add another section here down that space. So it's a significant addition of parking. We can accommodate it. We don't ever see that we would need that. So we would just be building more impervious surface area in front of the waterfront that would go unused. And this is not we're not asking for additional occupants in the building or to change the occupancy. We see that the parking accommodates the occupancy that we're looking to have in the building and just not provide access. So it actually, I think, be beneficial to the community members by limiting the amount of cars there.
Where does the 30% like come from? Does that just what is that based on? Is that like an industry like typically?
Yeah, that was looking at, and I wish Ed was here, one of the owners and operators, is, how many people are actually frequenting the event facilities. And say if there is an event, I mean, they would sell out the whole building. I mean, so that 30% is actually kind of giving a little extra over Where if you have an event here and it's the function hall is holding 200 people, those would be coming from the inn. So you would be blocking out rooms and using it. They're not going to rent the event hall to outside people without people actually staying there.
So you consider the 30% as a conservative buffer. That's the way you guys are.
Yeah, and it's also that 30% is double dipping on the event space, the restaurant, and the bar. So if you are having an event, plus you have people in the bar who would be from the inn, plus you have people in the restaurant who would be from the inn. So you have kind of this extra kind of contingency parking that's built into that 30%, if that makes sense.
Probably should have him go through his application. In the weeds on questions.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I can kind of summarize and go through it quickly. It's 4 pages of.
Just the five granting the variance would not be contrary.
Yeah, so
I know it's difficult, but it's just.
go through it all, yeah. Granting the variance would not be contrary to the public interest because the variance, if granted, provides parking for all the resort guests, employees, and outside patrons. The proposed 295 parking spaces accommodates all of the 114 guest rooms, along with an additional 30% for non-guest visitors of the inn. See attached supplementary summary, which is what we just looked at. As detailed in the zoning guidelines, parking requirements call for all guest rooms to be accommodated with the assumption that the restaurant, bar, and meeting rooms are being utilized fully by non-guest patrons. This assumes an additional 264 parking spaces, 528 total visitors. As the resort amenities are designed to prioritize service to the guest of the resort, additional parking spaces will never be utilized. The construction of the additional parking spaces will be contrary to the public interest. If required, an additional 60,000 square feet of undisturbed forest will be removed to accommodate these parking spaces. Although its impacts to the watershed of Lake Winnisquam will be mitigated and designed within state guidelines, the removal of the forest will have a direct impact on Lake Winnisquam and in the public interest. With all the parking needs accommodated, we ask for a variance to accommodate the parking needs as detailed in the supplemental parking count summary totaling 295. 2, if the variance were granted, the spirit of the ordinance would be observed because the ordinance looks to accommodate all parking needs for the hotel, restaurant, and the event facilities. These functions are not independent of one another. Rather, they are dependent on guests of the preserve at Winnisquam. Restaurants and function halls are to accommodate the needs of the guests. With a full occupancy, the restaurant and event facilities will be frequented by those staying at the resort. Guest rooms, employee, and outside visitor parking requirements have been accommodated as detailed in the report, aligning with the spirit of the ordinance. Any additional parking would go unused and be a contradiction to the ordinance. 3, granting the variance would be a substantial justice because the preserve seeks to provide a world-class resort experience on Lake Winnisquam while limiting its impact to the shoreline and natural landscape. Designing within an existing development, the preserve maintains 3,200 feet of wooded shoreline unique on Lake Winnisquam. As the ordinance duplicates parking requirements for the functions of the resort dependent on one another, the reduction of the zoning defined parking requirements will accommodate all necessary needs of the resort while preserving 2 acres of undisturbed shoreline along Lake Winnisquam. 4, the variance were granted, the values of the surrounding properties would not be diminished, excuse me. Properties surrounding the preserve will see an increase in overall property values following the construction of the new inn. As designed, the preserve will be a luxury 4-star resort, providing local lakefront communities with access to a world-class restaurant, spa, beaches, woodland, walking trails, and pristine waterfront. The proposed parking and landscape plan looks to preserve the existing wooded shoreline on Lake Winnisquam while limiting the resort's impact to the area's watershed. Minimizing the need for the additional 60,000 square feet of paved parking area will enhance both the surrounding properties and overall watershed of Lake Winnisquam. Unnecessary hardship. 5. A, owning to a special condition of the property that distinguishes it from the other properties in the area, denial of the variance would result in unnecessary hardship because I, no fair or substantial relationship exists between the general public purposes of the ordinance provisions and specific application of that provisions to the property because the preserve's 33 acre and 3,200 feet of shoreline is a unique parcel, not only on Lake Winnisquam, but throughout New England. The preserve at Winnisquam offers a unique all-inclusive resort experience. The ordinances parking provisions look to define the parking requirements on an independent basis without interpreting the overall function of the particular business. As the preserve at Winnisquam will operate the facility in support of the 114 guest rooms and cottages, associated parking counts have been accommodated. The preserves, the preservation of the pristine shoreline in Lake Winnisquam, wooded forest, extensive trail systems, exclusive restaurant, bar, and meeting rooms depend on the resort guests for their use. 2, the proposed use is a reasonable one because all parking requirements have been accommodated as defined in the ordinance when calculated as a comprehensive business with operations in support of one another. Additional accommodations have been provided for outside guests and other uses of the resort. The proposed use, a hotel, motel, or inn, is a permissible use within the resort commercial zone. The variance, if granted, would permit the construction of an appropriately sized and scaled parking lots commensurate to the use while maximizing preservation of the existing natural landscape. Further, the proposed parking accommodations provide the ability for the local community and general public to have access to the site and its amenities. B, explain if the criteria in subparagraph A are not established, an unnecessary hardship will be deemed to exist, and only if, owing to the special condition of the property that distinguishes it from the properties in the area, the property cannot be reasonably used in strict conformance with the ordinance, and variance is therefore necessary to enable reasonable use of it. The variance, if granted, would permit the construction of a suitable inn building with all associated functions, amenities, and support facilities on a limited footprint, thus maximizing preservation of the existing natural landscape. For the project to follow the letter of the ordinance, the parking footprint would need to be significantly expanded, accommodating parking spaces not needed for operations of the facility, negatively impacting the substantial investment in the property in the watershed of Lake Winnisquam. This expanded parking footprint would increase the building's presence along the waterfront, increase the watershed impact through expanded non-permeable areas, and significantly reduce the area of natural woodland on the site, creating unnecessary hardship for the site and the greater Lakes region. The extensive disturbance of the natural setting would significantly alter the experience to be provided at the preserve at Winnisquam and on Lake Winnisquam. The proposed variance, the preserve's unique site and design allows for a significant conservation of the site's natural setting when compared with likely alternative developments, and provide a rare opportunity for preservation of the watershed of Lake Winnisquam while promoting an economic development in the region.
Thank you.
So, try to make that as quick as possible.
You have any more questions?
Oh, not till later,
Not till later.
not till later.
Okay. I was opening at public input. Are you good for now? We open it to public input? Yeah. Any public input? Yeah, yep. You have to come up and speak into the mic, sorry.
Where's the mic? Oh.
They keep on talking about
It's got a name and
Say your
way.
name for the record.
Richard Fournier. I actually live in Belmont, but I'm looking at property on not too far from it. Tucker Shore Road, Belmont, New Hampshire. Everybody keeps on talking about the preserve, and by giving him this variance where you're eliminating the need to put a parking lot out into this conservation area. I guess the question is this where we give and take, and has they thought about giving a conservation easement for the undeveloped portions of this property so that they don't need this parking lot? I just kind of throw that out there because, I mean, like I said, this is where you give and take, and you're not going to make them build a parking lot in the woods. Well, how about putting a conservation easement on that section of the woods so it'll never be developed? And that's my only comment. I just want to.
I don't know that by giving them a conservation easement would absolve them of the need to meet our ordinance.
Well, I agree, but I think it's give and take. That's what I'm saying.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
Thank you. My name's Dave Barad. I'm in Abutter, 36 Sunrise Shores Road in Tilton. And I got a lot of questions. First,
Just to clarify, we're here about parking.
I have a lot of questions about parking and the domino effect, what could happen
We're
and
here
not
about a
happen.
variance for 265 spaces of parking.
And I'm going to be talking about that.
No, that's what we're here to talk tonight about.
I agree. And most zoning rules, which yours, are based on something like the architectural graphic standard that gives the size of the parking lot, how many parking lots you need. And that's based on past buildings and development that have been built that have worked. So all the numbers you have in your zoning rules are based on past developments that worked. And that's how the standards work. Now I see them coming in and they're asking for only 60%, give or take a few percentage points, of how many parking lots the zoning rules call for.
For 70%.
70. They're removing 30 from 100%.
I thought he said he's going to have 295 and they're taking 265 away.
Okay, sure.
Oh,
Yeah.
So they're taking away over 40% of the parking. Now, say you grant that and they build this and found out they need new parking. So they build a parking spot to accommodate it. That's going to change the drainage features, the drainage pipes they're putting in, the retention ponds, and what flows into the lake after the fact. So if they get the variance and it doesn't work, who's going to dig up all the pipes and drainage, retention ponds and fix it all up? And yeah,
Yeah.
but it doesn't seem reasonable. The zoning rules are based on developments that worked. And I'm here and there and saying, well, we're going to do 30% this, 30%. They're pulling the numbers. I don't know where they're pulling the numbers from, but I haven't a good location where they're putting it from. But I haven't seen any justification. What standard architectural book, like the architectural graphic standard, did you use that as a reference to cut down to say, oh, if we have all this, then our hotel is going to use this. We get a 7% reduction. I don't see where you're getting those standards from. And the zoning rules are based on developments that work, and cutting parking by 40% is significant. And in the future, if they decide to put in more parking, it's going to have a domino effect on stuff that's already in the ground. So the reasonable thing is follow the rules on project that worked and build this based on past successful projects, or take a chance that you're going to give them reduction and it's not going to work. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? More questions? I'm going to close public hearing.
The gentleman's comment in the back about if this variance is granted on the fact that you are looking to preserve this land, but the land hasn't been put in any sort of protection, what's to prevent in the future development? So you're getting this granted, you're giving this variance granted on hardship, that you don't want to develop or create unnecessary parking because you don't want to touch the pristine land, and this is a unique piece of property. I agree. And I like your project, but you keep mentioning this preserve, you keep mentioning the idea of conservation, and yet what moves have you made legally to keep it this way? What is to prevent the land to be sold to a new owner, let's say, after a given time, let's say a decade passes, and they're like, we're going to develop the whole waterfront. And so your variance was based on this plan here. So what is in place to make sure this is the plan?
There's any claim, they have to come back for that. Conservation is closing up this versus a housing development that we're putting in That's kind of the preservation that we're looking for. Treating conservation, we already have the wellhead, the protection area, and the shoreline. We're really wellhead, we're talking really not looking to put. I'm not asking for that tonight. But we would be back here in front of you.
The problem with that is in, let's say, 10, 15, 20 years, the zoning board will have changed and this conversation won't be remembered. And I like that. And, you know, a lot of your plan hinges upon this idea of preservation of the land. And you know, my question being, like, how is it being put in there? You know, and the variance granted for hardship based on you don't want to go into this, create all of this hard, you know, hard soil. It makes me nervous that, you know, corporations, you know, not always are proven to work. I mean, again, and not to say that that's what's going to happen, but there is no guarantee given the variance. Of,
Even if we didn't ask.
Right.
There's no, we're kind of back to the same situation. But
Right.
really, I'll look at the variance more of the way that the zone. So there really is no need for it. It's I think this is a unique situation where, I mean, I could see if we did have a secondary restaurant and we had a separate structure and it was 4 different businesses operating, but it's one building. The cottages have their own parking associated with those. It's one comprehensive building that's functioning together. They really depend on one another, the functions within it. If you're going to come stay here, you need to have breakfast. There aren't, say if we're doing kitchenettes in the rooms, I could see there would be more of a concern of that kind of double dipping. But if you stay here, you're going to have breakfast here, you're going to have dinner here. So to say that the restaurant is independent of the actual guest rooms, they can't function without one another. So there's never a situation where we would need more parking. And that's really what we're looking to do. I mean, we're not dependent on the variance to do the project. It's just we don't need it and we don't want to have to build it.
Just for clarification, but you're talking about like you already can't develop where the wellheads are and you already can't develop on the offset of the shoreline. Is that what you're saying by the
Yeah.
small piece?
use the big picture. Use the big,
Correct.
Yeah.
This whole section here, we can't develop, and then all of this we can't develop. Anyways, so we're only talking this little space here, which is what we would put the parking lot in. This is the wellhead protection area, so we can't put any structure or even paved surface on that. This is all wetlands. This is wetlands coming through here, and this is within the shoreline zone. So we're really, you know, that's the area there that we're talking about, and then we would expand this as well. So you'd see it more from on the Route 3 side. But it kind of goes back to.
So you're saying that you can't develop that. So what we're talking about putting into conservation is the area of the parking lot. That's roughly. I'm not talking about 25 acres of undeveloped. It's already undevelopable.
So you're saying the necessity of what I'm saying isn't really needed because most of the land, let's say 70%, maybe 60%, is undeveloped anyway, without coming back to the board looking for some wetland.
Correct. Which you guys can't change wetlands anyways. So yeah, I mean, the site is already, it's a unique site. It has so much shoreline that we're going to be protecting. Say if we're coming at this from a residential housing development approach, it would be different. but I think the nature of this as a resort, and even different from a hotel and a restaurant and all these different little entities, you know, that's a different function as well. Say the hotel on 93 when you're coming out of Concord, there's a hotel there and a restaurant as well. So those would be two separate businesses operating independently of one another, and they're attracting customers from multiple sources. Where this is, the restaurant's in the building. It's not a separate structure. So you're really, if you come here, you're staying here, you're eating in the restaurant. So it's unique in the zoning laws where that's where your zoning laws are, you know, they speak to the parking count of a resort, of you have this many guest rooms, you need this amount of parking spaces. And that's what we've accommodated with the extra as well as for employees. So, you know, the core of this building is bringing guests to the resort to enjoy the grounds and the facilities. And we've accommodated all of the parking for that, plus, you know, an additional, 150 parking spaces, 160 parking spaces.
I think about our town, I think about parking lots in our town, kind of drawn towards the exit in Shaw's parking lot, not Shaw's anymore. The
Hobby
the
Lobby.
Hobby Lobby parking lot, where they put an entire another business into the parking lot. They were required to build based on our parking lot count. Look about the outlets where they put a restaurant and another business. Parking lot. So I understand what he's saying, where the literal definition of our zoning law is that this is a business and this is a business and this is where you can double the number. And it makes sense to me not to literally follow that number. What I have no idea of is what is the appropriate, like, I don't know that number.
The 295.
Yeah, like what's the, I don't know what makes sense. The other half of it that I think of is that normally it's about congestion, like we talked about parking lot in a downtown, one of the downtown businesses. All about congestion downtown. Or if they don't have enough parking spaces, it doesn't make business. It's not like they're going to start parking cars on the side of Route 3.
We won't be doing that.
It couldn't be that.
So-
Like, it wouldn't be the thing.
No, and that's,
He said he was gonna shuttle them in.
Ah.
this,
Right?
What I guess what I'm wondering is, if we've talked about this in the past, is there an ability for us to like put an asterisk on it? This goes to planning, who has a much better idea of parking in town.
Right.
Says like, yeah, all right, you get it. Maybe you don't need as many spaces you're asking for, but actually we're going to cut it by 200 instead of 65.
Doable.
Well, you would have to do everything.
So we couldn't pass it on a contingent that it goes through planning. I feel like we've done that in the past. So this is-
Planning side, when they
Zoning board, can you hear me?
want.
Zoning board, is it still open for public comment?
No, we
No.
closed that section.
Oh, I'm sorry, didn't hear that.
What's that?
I don't, okay, I'm back.
Okay.
Okay. So that's the only thing I'm like, it makes sense that they don't need as many parking spaces as our law literally requires. What I just, you know,
Yeah, the number and then the 30% reduction of 40, I didn't bring my calculator. Yeah, like you're not really quoting where that fact comes from.
even aside from that, I
yeah.
just don't know how the number fit in the town. You know what I mean? That's why
Sure.
like planning board would know
A little better.
in our community, they have a better idea.
They'd see this.
So I just want, so if you want to approve what they ask, are you looking for possibly going even to a lower number? Because if you give a variance, it's like a setback, right? You give them a 10-foot setback where they need 20, they can still build more conforming. So they're not going to be limited to not building more parking
Right.
because the ordinance allows or requires them to build more. So they would be more conforming if you said 295 and they went to 300 or 350, they can always build more if they need it because you're not telling them they can't build it.
Right.
It's going the other way. So, I mean, unless you want to reduce the number even more and talk to planning about that, I just wasn't sure where the question was. So just wanted to make that clear that they can,
This, and then they,
Because planning
Then-
says you need more parking.
then they'll have to
They're
build.
doing it and they don't have to
they'll
come back
do
to
it
us.
on their own.
Right. That's a good
Probably be
point.
more expensive because they'll have to call everyone in when they're not
Right, well, yeah, to
there. And
redo
this
it.
is, a cost saving on theirs too. That's for sure. That's a lot of pavement.
Yeah, if we ever needed to, who knows, with vehicles and such in the future, if we did want to build more, we'd be back at planning as well. Say if they say, this site plan looks great, let's start construction, we want to then add another parking lot, we would be back in front of planning to review all that.
And what you're saying is planning could say anyways, looking at this, hey, we're not going to approve this unless you put more spaces in. So it's going to go through that filter anyways, and they don't need to come back to us because they're just getting more conforming by doing that. Right, okay.
which is weird. that they won't.
Yeah, this is like a,
Yeah, they could just go through and just be conforming.
Because it's more infringing on.
All right. Public
we've closed
is
public comment.
closed.
I'm okay. That was my big question is that, like, we've run into parking before in the past and we've kind of deferred it to planning.
Mhm.
But it was a little more clear cut. But I think Leanne, the way she spelled it out makes sense that planning is still going to look at this. Planning's still going to say, where they stand on it.
Mhm.
They're just going to become more conforming. They're not going to become less conforming. All right, you have any more questions?
I'm good.
No? Anything else to add? Got a motion to? Yes, we can do that first. I thought we did it after. Yep, no, that's fine. Granting the variance would not be contrary to the public interest. I kind of talked about literally enforcing it. I see it as other businesses where we've literally built the number of parking spaces and now here we are
Taking away-
rehashing it afterwards, taking parking spaces away and putting entire new businesses in. And that's in situations where people are coming and doing different things in those parking spots, not staying in the same location, utilizing it.
Yeah, I agree.
The variance are granted, the spirit of the ordinance would be observed. We kind of talked about this. The spirit of the ordinance is tied to multiple businesses coming and using like a strip mall type thing, not a, kind of, this is almost like a mixed use, so like a better way to put it. Granting the variance would do substantial justice. Again, I totally understand the sentiment about like the intent is less development, is generally better, preserving more stuff. I guess they could come back and change it, but the way that I'm looking at this.
The way I
is
look at
really-
it, they don't really have that much room to build because wetlands, wells,
Conservation.
setbacks from the shoreline really only leaves them this little area.
Yeah, it's not a huge part of the property, but yeah. Available. If the variance were granted, the values of the surrounding property would not be diminished. Again, there's no evidence to prove that properties would go up or down either way. Unnecessary hardship, owing to a special condition of the property that distinguishes it from other properties in the area, denial of the variance would result in an unnecessary hardship because, one, no fair and substantial relationship exists between the general public purposes of the ordinance provision and the specific application of that provision to the property, because I look at this as tying it literally to each space, each function. It's going to get filtered through planning. We literally hold this. In theory, all they're going to end up doing is becoming more compliant, and it's a unique property. It's not a strip mall. It's for staying and going. They have accommodations for overflow. they can't fit all the customers and their hotels or restaurants empty because it's only people from the hotel and they're not all, I mean, the town doesn't lose, business just loses. It's proposed use is a reasonable one, same thing. Spelled out pretty well to me that don't need to meet the literal parking thing. All across the country, we can see parking lots that are getting turned into other things because we built too much parking. And we can go through, explain how if the criteria in paragraph A are established. I felt like we already established them. If you guys want to go through this, we can do that.
I motion that we bring case ZB 22-10 for a vote.
To approve.
Oh, I do? Okay.
We usually
Oh,
we make the
okay. Well,
motion-
you know what I'm saying? Because then I'm like, I didn't want to say I was in the affirmative.
Usually
but-
we make the motion in the affirmative.
All right. I make a motion to approve case ZB 22-10.
Second it. Discussion?
No.
Yeah. Those in favor of ZB case 22-10, a variance from Article 3, Section 3.5 of the parking provision to allow parking counts for guests and associated patrons to account of, actually, we probably should have put that in that.
Yeah,
Shouldn't we
for a
have?
count of 295.
295. We reword the motion, Leanne, for, it's okay, all right. For a variance from Article 3, Section 3.5 of the parking vision to allow for 295 spaces. Total spaces.
I second it.
Those in favor? Aye. Those opposed? There's no one opposed. Passes. Thank you all for coming in. You stop recording this. Oh, actually, no, we don't. We have to do minutes and we gotta make a motion to adjourn. I always forget minutes. All right. Any motion on the minutes from
I make a motion to accept
7:25?
I will second that motion.
September 25th minute.
July 20th.
July
July
25th. I'll second that motion, accepting the minutes.
All right, motion to accept the minutes from July 25th. It's been seconded. Those in favor?
Aye.
And the ayes have it. And then anything else? Bring up? To adjourn?
I make a motion to adjourn
I
meeting.
Second
Seconded.
that.
Made and seconded. Those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Meeting is adjourned at 7:07.
That was a tricky one.
Why do you cut off the